There's certain watches in the industry that have earned legendary status. There's certain watches that just every single collector and their dog want. But why did they earn that legendary status, and why does everyone want them? Well, that's what we're talking about today. In this video, in no particular order, I'm going to be counting down the top 10 watches that every collector wants in their collection and why they want them. Welcome back to the Chisholm Hunter channel. My name is Harrison, as always. And before we start this video, if you can do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button to help a fellow watch nerd out, I would really appreciate it. All right, let's crack into number one. Let's start with a popular one. Let's start with the Rolex Daytona. The Rolex Daytona was originally launched in 1963, and it actually wasn't called the Daytona when it was launched. It was called the Cosmograph. The Cosmograph was designed for professional racing drivers, and that's why it has that sporty kind of feel to it. I'm not going to say it wasn't popular, but at that period, it wasn't the Rolex Daytona that we know today. That was until Mr. Paul Newman got involved. Paul Newman famously wore one of these Daytonas, and it sent demand and auction prices and aftermarket prices and all this kind of stuff sky high. It rocketed the Daytona into fame. Vintage Paul Newman Daytonas literally fetch millions of pounds at auction, and that's not a lie. It's insane. When you put all this together, the fame aspect with Paul Newman, the sexy, sporty design, the rarity of Rolexes, the marketing of Rolex as a brand as a whole, you get a watch that all collectors want, and that is the Daytona. Next up at number 2, we have the Patek Philippe Nautilus. Specifically, let's talk about the 5711. Actually, let's talk about Patek as a whole, and then we'll hone in on the 5711. The Nautilus was designed by Gerald Genta in 1976. Now, Gerald Genta in the industry is an absolute icon. He's an absolute legend. He designed things like the IWC Ingenieur or the AP Royal Oak, and also, of course, this. And at the time, the Nautilus broke all the rules of luxury watches. When you think of luxury back in the day, you think of these tiny little dainty watches, maybe in gold with leather straps. That's what people were wearing. Now, after the Nautilus was launched, it kind of pioneered the way for sporty watches to come really into fashion the way that they did. And now we get onto the 5711. So the 5711 was introduced in 2006, and it was actually discontinued in 2021. Now, it's no secret within the industry that Patek watches are extremely hard to get a hold of. So when you pair that rarity aspect with the legendary design and also then have a discontinuation on top of that, making it even more rare and even more sought after, you then get a watch that everybody wants in their collection because you simply can't have it. On the secondary market, these watches go for disgusting amounts of money. Actually, let's just look it up really quick together while we're here. If I was to buy a 5711 today, how much would it cost? Oh my God. A 5711 today would cost you roughly 80 to 100,000 pounds. Before we go on with this list, it's time to revitalize the wrist check. We've not done one in like ages. So what is on your wrist today? Please let me know in the comments. On my wrist today is the King Seiko. It's a watch that I got, a couple of months ago. And honestly, it's had a lot more wrist time than I thought it would. On the subject of Gerald Genta and legendary designs, we get to AP. Now, AP is a brand that I've always loved, and it's kind of carved its own way, and yeah, I love that brand. But yeah, let's talk about AP. Let's talk about the Royal Oak. The Royal Oak debuted in 1972, and it was also designed, of course, by Gerald Genta. And this was the first luxury watch made in stainless steel, being priced like it was a gold watch. So it was very highly priced for the time, but that's because of the engineering that was going into it. The Royal Oak was big, bold, and unlike anything that anyone had ever seen before. And it had enough differences from the Nautilus to kind of carve its own path, to go its own way, to be the pinnacle. I think it's pretty much the pinnacle of AP. The Jumbo reference 15202 is probably the closest in spirit to the original, and that retains a lot of the original kind of heritage. It has an ultra thin movement, a classic 39mm case, and also when you think of any of these brands, when you think of Patek Philippe, AP, or Vacheron, they're all part of the Holy Trinity, which makes it even more desirable. Next on the list, we have Omega, the classic Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch. You know, us watch nerds are not imaginative when it comes to names. It landed on the moon, we called it the moon watch. It has Snoopy in the dial, we call it the Snoopy. It's green, we call it the Hulk. Anyway, I'm going off topic. The Omega Speedmaster was actually released in 1957, but it didn't really boom in popularity until a little bit later. Now, the Speedmaster, quite similar to the Daytona, was designed as a sporty racing watch. But that quickly changed when it was worn by NASA's astronauts during the Apollo missions, including, of course, the legend himself, the handsome hunk, Buzz Aldrin on the moon, landing in 1969. The Speedmaster, by far, is one of the most historically important watches ever produced and ever made. It withstood just disgusting amounts of testing from NASA to see if it'd be okay in those environments, and it passed everything that they put it through. Now, specifically, they did use a Hesalite version, so it wasn't the sapphire sandwich that we see today, but you still can get the Hesalite version if you want to stay true to the original. And the historical importance of this watch are partially why everyone loves it. But when you strip that away, when you strip away the historical importance and just look at the design, it's still such a sexy watch. I still think this would be popular, maybe not as popular, but still as popular. Maybe not as popular, but still as popular. I think this would still be popular even if it didn't have the astronaut vibe attached to it. I think this would still be popular if it didn't have the history attached to it, because it's just such a sexy looking watch, especially the white dial new Speedy. That was stunning. At number 5, we have the Vacheron Constantin overseas range. This is, in my eyes, the pinnacle of the Holy Trinity. I think that Vacheron is at the top, personally speaking, but I'm going to get shot in the comments for that one, so let me just quickly move on. In 1977, Vacheron released the 222, which remains to this day one of my favorite Vacheron models. And after this, they then released the overseas as a kind of blend between this model, the elegant kind of futuristic design of this model with a sports aesthetic. This was introduced in 1996, so it was a little bit of a late bloomer when it comes to the Trinity, but it was definitely one of the best decisions they've ever made, because this watch is unreal. Now, Vacheron, alongside being one of the Holy Trinity as well as AP and Patek, is the longest watch brand in continuous production. It's not the oldest watch brand in the world, that goes to Blancpain, but it is the oldest watch brand in continuous production, which is insane. Now, when you look at the overseas, when you look at the beautiful mechanics behind the overseas, when you look at the history of the 222 and how it feeds in to the overseas, when you look at all of these factors, you can understand why it's so desirable. And now we get on to kind of a boring one, because I know that a lot of you guys will know that I was going to talk about this anyway, so I'll kind of glaze over it, but it is the Rolex Submariner. The Rolex Submariner was introduced in 1953/54 at Baselworld, and this Submariner helped define the dive watch genre. Literally, whenever you look at a dive watch now, look at the Submariner, and you will definitely see similarities between the two. It kind of paved the way for every dive watch to come. It was the first watch to be waterproof up to 100 meters, and I think a black dial Submariner, no date, just goes to show that boring is better. It's more classic, it's more longer lasting, and honestly, this watch defined what the industry is today, and without Rolex, we would not have this humongous watch industry, so we need to thank Rolex for that. But I'm not going to dwell on this too much, because I have talked a lot about Rolex. Every collector wants a sub. They want one in their collection of Rolex, at least, and it's, well, what can I say? It's a classic. Next up, we get to Tudor, and we're going to talk about Tudor as a whole before we get to the watch in particular. Hans Wilsdorf, the gentleman that founded Rolex in the first place, also founded Tudor. And the first Tudor Submariner was introduced in 1954. This Tudor Submariner was quite different from the Rolex sub, but you could definitely see similarities between the two. In 1995, the Tudor Prince Submariner 79190 marked the last sub model that Tudor would ever make. Now, after 1995, Tudor kind of went into a hibernation period. I think that the Rolex brand were primarily focusing on Rolex at that point, but when Tudor did come back in 2012, they came back with a humongous boom. In 2012, the Black Bay line was introduced. Specifically, this was the Gen 1 Black Bay Heritage. Now, we're on the Gen 3/4 pretty much, so there's a lot of changes that have gone on, which make the Gen 1 a lot more vintage and actually a lot more sought after now. For example, they have ETA movements, they have a rose on the logo, they're a little bit thinner. There's a lot of kind of key differences in the Gen 1 to the Gen 3, and Rolex and Tudor typically never do ETA movements. They never buy in movements, they always do in-house. So when you get something that's a little bit different, a little bit aside the norm, like the Tudor Gen 1 that has an ETA movement, it makes it more expensive. The Black Bay 58 was then released soon after the Black Bay Heritage, and this is the watch that everybody wants in their collection at the moment. I think it's a combination of maybe the Heritage and the 58, but the 58 is a little bit more palatable just because of the sizing. So there's a ton of history there. You do get a ton of brilliant functionality in your watches, and the designs are killer. The next brand on the list has to be a Lange Söhne. A. Lange was revived after German reunification in 1994, and the Lange 1 at that point was its absolute flagship. Now, obviously, there has been changes since then, with the Odysseus being their kind of new flagship. The Odysseus Honey Gold, by the way, being just stunning, but I'm going off topic. Let me continue. A. Lange brought the brilliance of German engineering with the simplicity of German design, and you can definitely see this through all German brands. The date windows are big, they're bold, they're very easy to read. Everything about them is simplistic, stripped down, but also just brilliantly done. Now, one of the key things that collectors absolutely love is rarity. They like things that other people don't have. And just to give you an example here, Rolex produce about 1 million watches a year, but A. Lange & Söhne produce around about 5,000. So it's super rare. Now, to top that off, they probably could produce more, but they use something called the twice is better motto. Essentially, what that is they build something, strip it all down, and build it again, just so that they know it's absolutely perfect. And because of this rarity, the brilliant German design, having a little bit of a USP being German, and also having really, really cool kind of patents like honey gold, this has made A. Lange just a collector's dream, and every collector wants them. And now we get to Casio, taking a big step down in price here. But Casio is a brand that everybody loves. It's a brand that 99% of us started with. It's a brand that's universally respected amongst all collectors, no matter how expensive their collection might be, because that's probably where they started in the first place. There is nowhere else that you could buy a watch for £9 or £10 that will last literally, and I say this from experience, about 10 years. Now, Casio, as well as being brilliant at making affordable, durable stuff, they also have pretty incredible inventive skills. They invented the calculator, more or less the prototype, in 1954, and then a bit after that they invented the proper calculator. And in 1946 they actually invented a finger ring so that you could smoke cigarettes down to the nub, which is insane. But there's so much innovation that happens behind Casio, and there's nothing that you could say to me to make me not like Casio. I love what they do. I love how affordable they are. I love how fun they are and how different they are. And Casio as a brand will always be front of mind when it comes to collectors, because there's just so much fun stuff going on. Next on the list, we have JLC, or Jaeger LeCoultre. The JLC reversal was born in 1931, and interestingly enough, it was actually born to prevent against damage to your reversal, to your watch, when playing polo. Essentially, the rich people would ride around and play polo, and they didn't want to damage their watch, but they still wanted to wear a wristwatch because you need to keep up with the Joneses and all that. So JLC invented the JLC reversal. Essentially what this was is the watch face would flip over to show a solid case back, so whenever you were going to play polo you could just flip that over. And nowadays it's kind of extended so that it has two faces, but it's just become the staple of JLC, and it's become entirely iconic in the industry. It is so different to anything else you'll see. Where else can you get a watch that is essentially two watches for the price of one? And by the way, it's all controlled by one movement, which makes it even more incredible in terms of high horology. Interestingly enough as well, in Batman, Christian Bale wears a JLC reversal, and that's because when he's, at nighttime, he's Batman, and in the daytime, he's not Batman. So he flips it around based on that. Because of this iconic design, because of the limited numbers, because of the high horology, this has become a staple in everyone's collection. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button, or follow our Instagram at Chisholm Hunter Watches, or follow my Instagram at HB Lifelens, and I'll see you, and our podcast, the Into the Mind podcast. I messed that up majorly. And yeah, See you guys soon.